ERP program is the title of this webinar, and it's a webinar dedicated to our beloved ERP systems and our favorite 90s superstar DJ, Mr. Pete Tong. If you don't know us already, and I think some of you do, Systoc is an organization that helps businesses or other organizations to navigate periods of complex change and transformation. For those of you who do know Systoc, you'll know what we're like, you'll know how we work, and you'll know that if anything doesn't go to plan in this webinar, we will demonstrate our agility and our ability to pivot, and you probably won't notice a thing. I wasn't on a podcast, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and one of the presenters all of a sudden got hiccups in the middle of the podcast. So if that happens to us, the show will go on. As I say, we'll have time for questions and answers at the end of the webinar in about 45 minutes. But if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. And as I say, for those who haven't joined, have joined in the last couple of minutes, it'd be good to see where people are joining from today. So let's kick things off. So it's all on Pete Tong, how to avoid a failed ERP program. So organizations have been implementing ERP programs for nearly 30 years now. So surely by now we know all the pitfalls, all the things that could go wrong on an ERP program, don't we? No, wrong, we don't. Unfortunately, we haven't learned the lessons. As some of you know, and as I've mentioned already, Systoc works with organizations that are going through the change of implementing an ERP program. It's a big part of what we do. Sometimes that's SAP, sometimes it's Oracle, sometimes it's Workday, Microsoft Dynamics, Infor M3, Dayforce. For us, it doesn't really matter what the technology is. We see a lot of the same challenges, a lot of the same obstacles and blockers on all these different programs. And Systoc isn't a system integrator. We understand the technology, we understand the importance of technology, but we start off on the assumption that our customers have selected the right technology for their business and their business ambitions, and they've selected the right partner or partners to implement that technology successfully. So if a system has been built and tested successfully, data's been migrated, the systems have been integrated and cut over successfully, that's it, right, isn't it? That's the bones, that's the platform for a successful ERP implementation. No, wrong again. Over the next 50 minutes, we're going to share our experiences, all four of us, and we're going to hopefully give you some insights into stop programs from going Pete Tong. And for those not in on the joke, Pete Tong became rhyming slang in the 1990s for when things go wrong, in honor of the legendary DJ producer, Mr. Pete Tong, who is getting no royalties or credits from this webinar, I should say. So before we kick off, some brief introductions to those on the call, on the webinar, sorry. I'm Guy Sorrell, I'm the Managing Director of Systoc UK, and I'm a veteran of about 50 ERP programs. Alex, give us a wave. She is. Alex is one of our ERP process experts at Systoc and a veteran, if you don't mind being called a veteran, Alex, I think it's a compliment, of a similar number of ERP programs. Dan Taylor's one of our ERP training experts, and Dan also has a great number of ERP programs under his belt. Dan, give us a wave. Did you wave? I didn't see a wave. There he is. So he's got a great number of ERP programs under his belt, despite his youthful good looks. And then last, but by no means least, in fact, our most important guest speaker today, and this is the point where I feel like I'm George Michael welcoming Elton John on stage at Wembley, Mr. Dave Osmond, who has been described. You're going to wave, Dave? Did you wave as well?
I did.
Good wave, solid wave. Dave is I like to call him a living ERP program legend, big brain, inspiring leader, and he's my old boss as well. So Dave, that check that you promised hopefully is in the post for that shout out, so thank you. Thanks also to Rochelle Murphy, who's clicking us through the slides, which is beyond our collective capability, so thank you all in advance. Moving on swiftly. So as I said earlier, we're not going to focus on the technology side of ERP programs today. We're going to focus on the organizational side, so the process, the jobs, the roles, and that thing that actually runs a business, drum roll, the people. And at Systoc, we could dedicate probably a week's worth of webinars to this topic, but instead we're going to focus on what we believe are the top 3 things that you need to know, other than your expensive technology, the top 3 things that could derail your ERP program. And those 3 things are leadership and sponsorship, organizational roles, and skills and capabilities. And because there's so much to cover, we're planning to run a separate webinar on another couple of topics, and those are embedding long-term behavioral change and that really important part, long-term capability build and realizing the value of the ERP investment. And we do encourage and welcome your views on any other topics that you'd like us to cover. If there's anything we covered today that you'd like to dig deeper into, please do let us know. Please post in the chat. If there's any topics that we touch on or anything we don't touch on that you'd like to dig into, as always, pop thoughts, any questions, any ideas into the chat. So I'm going to kick off now, and I'll hand over to Alex. I'm going to do things slightly differently. So instead of painting a rosy picture of an ideal ERP program, I'm going to paint a picture of what might happen if we don't follow the things that could go wrong or could prevent us from having a successful ERP program. So starting with leadership and sponsorship. In our experience, unsuccessful ERP programs typically fail to appreciate the importance and the role of leadership in the success of an ERP program, and in particular, leadership being change advocates. If leaders aren't engaged in the role they play in making a program a success, if they're not also treated as people who are impacted by the change, and they're not educated on how to lead others through the change, there's a number of outcomes that are likely. The first one that we identify is that there's typically going to be a lack of vision or lack of destination, as we call it in Systoc, as our heritage is in the aviation industry, a lack of vision. So that lack of vision will manifest itself in there being a lack of connectivity from people across an organization to the goals, the purpose, the outcomes that are trying to be delivered by an ERP program. If people can't see connectivity between what they do on a daily basis and the line of sight between what the program's trying to achieve and organizational goals and outcomes, we find that there's typically less adoption, there's less engagement from people across an organization. So that absence of a vision, a destination as defined by a leadership community can have quite significant impacts. The second thing we often identify is if leadership isn't engaged sufficiently is an absence of empathy for the change that's being deployed across an organization. And that's a really important thing, particularly when teams are more distributed and often don't meet up on a regular basis. Dave, I want to bring you in at this point just to see if you've got any insights from your extensive experience of ERP programs.
Thanks, Guy. Yeah, I've got a few thoughts, I guess. And I think they perhaps add some colour to where you're going. I think, first of all, my thought is that whole leadership piece starts at the very top of leadership, or should. It's a real obvious statement to make, but it so often doesn't happen, you know, where the CEO, the president, the MD, whoever it is that's the head of the tree in the organisation, doesn't make a really clear statement up front about the fact they're behind this program, the fact that it's important, what the purpose of it is, why it's important to each function in the company, why they're looking for everybody to get behind it. It's just a real clear statement. But so many times I have been involved in projects and programs, particularly the bigger ones where it's all the more important, where you've had to do that retrospectively because it's just not been gathering the momentum, and you've needed that sort of leadership cascade, if you like, later than it ought to have been. I think the other reason that's important is because that really ought to set the tone then for some consistent comms throughout the journey, both throughout the journey in terms of timeline, but also throughout the organisation. There should be a sort of one team sort of approach that's nurtured, so that everybody feels like they're part of it and feels like they've been engaged and they're involved. You mentioned something about management having or leadership showing empathy. I think leadership themselves need empathy as well from their seniors. So the very top level, the board, the CEO, again, these senior folk ought to be up front saying to their leaders, look, this is going to be tough probably for you at times. Your people are going to be not too happy about some of it. They're going to be coming to you with issues. We expect that. It's to be expected. Let us equip you with some tools, you know, you need to be able to respond to this, and we'll talk about some of the tools later on, no doubt, as we get into it. But there needs to be that empathy. Don't forget, leaders need empathy as well. They're not masters of all, even though they're expected to be quite often. But I guess importantly, even though there's that empathy, it also needs to be that there's an expectation right from the outset as well, an expectation that everybody's going to get involved and do their best to make this a success.
Thanks, Dave. I think the point you make about leaders are still people too. That they don't know everything. That they can't be masters of all. So we have to take them on a journey as well. That's really interesting. I think the next point I want to get across is the importance of engaging with middle managers. So if your leadership community doesn't feel engaged, doesn't understand their role, perhaps isn't united behind a vision for an organization, the likelihood is that they're not going to be cascading messages, as Dave said, to other people across the organization, their direct reports, their first lines, their teams, and insist that we recognize that middle management, those people who are actually operationally responsible for the teams who are going to be significantly impacted by a change, if we don't engage with them successfully and at the right time, that can pose a real challenge to long-term embedding of change. So passing back to Dave, have you seen examples of where this has been done well? We've identified the problem statement. Have you seen anywhere this has been done well, Dave?
Yeah, I think so, or better, certainly. And I think it's where there's a recognition of exactly what you say, that the middle managers are the all-important doers, right? They're the people that carry weight with the people that are transacting on a daily basis. And very often they and their teams are working to a set of instructions, right? A set of objectives, or however that business is organized. But there's a path laid out for them, right, against which they're measured. And when a program is built into people's objectives, when a program has an expectation created about it that things will change, could be some of the metrics around what the program's trying to achieve, faster cash, better quality here, better data there, whatever it is. But if you build those things in, and if you make them almost the day job subject of discussion, so that in team meetings it becomes something that's a standing agenda item, how are we getting on with, how is that change coming? Have we written our objectives up? Are we working with the data, and have we transacted the data? All those sort of things, all those transactional things that are measurable, should just become daily conversation, not something special that's going on in the program. Or I think where I've seen that happen, it's for the better. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, building it into the expectations of managers, of leaders, I think is an important part. I think one of the other things we wanted to raise was around the potential that there's a lack of ownership for the change across leadership if they're not sufficiently engaged. And if that sense of ownership isn't taken on board by leadership, then you have the risk that it's perceived as a technology program. We've all been there if you've been on ERP programs, and a sense that the business doesn't really own the change, and therefore that long-term embedding of new ways of working is harder to achieve. And again, Dave, I think through some of our conversations, you've seen some examples of this and how to address it more importantly.
Yeah, it's probably this one's a little bit anecdotal, but I'll share it because I think it makes the point. I was sat in a senior review being asked by the CEO, what benefits had been brought into, and to demonstrate what they were and what level of buy-in I was getting, and so forth. And it became pretty clear that around the room, the rest of the board may well have talked to me about buying into some of these things, but they weren't talking up to them at the appropriate times, let's put it that way, and nodding when I was sharing. And fair play to CEO at the time, he picked up on it, particularly with one guy who was the unfortunate one who got the example shared, and it was the procurement director. And basically he told me and him to go and sit in a room. Pretty much his words were, go and sit in a room until white smoke comes out and you've agreed what the benefits are, and you've written them down and signed up to them, and I want to see them written into the budget and objectives, etc., etc. Now, say it's anecdotal, and it was quite a painful experience for everybody involved, trust me. But it set a bit of a tone around that boardroom of, don't just nod your head and make out that you're going to buy into this. This is for real. You need to really buy into this, and you need to own what you're buying into, because I am going to track it. Not sure he did track it so well going on as it goes, but the intent was there and it created the right atmosphere, let's put it that way.
That's interesting. The final point from me before I pass to Alex is there's a risk that if leadership isn't engaged on a personal level, but also as a community of leaders, there's a risk that you have a lack of unity, a lack of integration between those leaders, and a lack of integration of what the program is trying to achieve. So you can find division, and you can find that different leaders are perhaps operating in different ways with different levels of engagement and sponsorship for the program. And again, Dave, I know from experience that we've got a good example of where that was the case.
Yeah, it was one of the programs that you and I have been on, right? And follows the theme I was just talking about, where we were getting a sort of nodding dog syndrome without the real belief and support that we needed from some of the areas. So we decided to set up what was essentially a wall walk for the board, and we had each of the board come through that wall walk, and I don't know, it's 2 or 3 hours, I guess, or something, that walked them through, reminding them why we set up with the intention of doing what we were doing with that program, where we were with it, what it involved for their people, which was sort of quite important, because I don't think they necessarily had a full grasp of the realities of what we were actually doing. They're quite shocked by some of the data we were able to show them and some of the work that we opened their eyes to that their own people were doing, if you like. Reason it was important was because we didn't do it with them individually. We had various tranches of them in there, so they got to share each other's experiences and to be able to have that sort of cross-discipline conversation. 2 results: within a couple of days, there was a great message cascaded to every member of the organisation about the importance of, etc., and some of the details. But I think more importantly, even, it was palpable that there was the right sort of instruction, the right sort of commitment being expected within each of the functions of the people that had attended. For me, the message is we did it too late. Probably could have done it earlier. Hey, these are all learnings, right? That's why we go through these things. Well, they're never perfect. Well, I've never been involved in a perfect one. Maybe it's because it's me.
I don't think that's the case. So yeah, I think building on that, Dave, I think one of the risks, if you don't provide the right level of engagement for leadership, is at worst, and we've seen examples of this, they could end up working against the outcomes that you're trying to achieve of the program. And I know we had one example on a project where all the way through the life cycle of the ERP program, all of the leadership team was singing the right songs, humming the right hymns, and then we found out after go live, one of the leadership had been telling their teams not to worry, that they'd go back to old ways of working once the technology had been implemented. He would find a way, and of course that meant a lot more post-program engagement and work with that community and with that leader. So in our doomsday scenario, from a leadership perspective, our leadership community is not engaged. It feels no sense of ownership for the change, and it doesn't start to realize the value of the return on investment from the ERP investment, and could actively start working against the goals. So pretty bad, but I think Dave shared some valuable solutions to that. So that's our assessment from a leadership and a sponsorship perspective. I'm going to pass to Alex Wilson now. He's going to take us through the next section.
Okay, thanks, Guy. Hi, everyone. I should also say thank you to Guy for aging me in the intro on the call. I probably have been through quite as many ERP implementations as he has, but I won't admit it. Okay, so we're at the point now, your shiny new ERP system is good to go. It's beautiful. It technically works how it's supposed to. You've worked out it's going to help you deliver your organization's long-term strategy, vision, and as Guy and Dave have just been talking about, most importantly, your leadership team have been actively engaged and have supported the program from start to end. That's all you need, right? That is the definition of a successful ERP program right there. Wrong, or Pete Tong as we're calling it today. So don't get me wrong, these are all aspects of a successful ERP implementation, but there's probably other things that you should have considered. Let's take, for example, what if you haven't considered business, big emphasis on business, process design. So you probably looked at processes while you were designing your system, and how that would work. But I'm probably guessing that these were process-driven system-driven processes. Wow, mixing my words up today. Quite possibly those provided by your chosen ERP or systems integrator. And you thought, yeah, they'll do quite nicely for me. I don't need to do anything else with them. No. So by not taking this opportunity to actually identify your business processes, and this is how your people will operate, not just how they are transacting in the system, but what else you do, you miss a whole plethora of opportunities. So Dave, is there anything there that you can think of straight away that you want to bring up?
Yeah, I think it's probably just embellishing a little on what you've said, which is where you were going, which is around the need for an honesty around the process mapping, by which I mean it's not just nodding to what the process is at a high level or should be. It's actually what the process is. So what do I mean by that? You know, it's not always happy path. You know, most of our day jobs in work are filled with things that go wrong, right? Where something isn't quite as it should be, as we would hope it would be. So it's about documenting the processes at all those levels, including what do we do when things aren't as we expected, because that's still part of the process, right? It's just a step away from the regular happy path process, but we do need to document it, and so often we don't. So there's something around that. I think there's also something around it's an honesty theme again. I think it's sort of recognizing that there might be a shift in workload, and we don't always know it when we're documenting the as-is and the to-be processes, but often you can spot it. But we almost sort of, or I've seen it brushed over almost, you know, because it might raise that ugly spectre that someone's going to have some more people or something, you know, or it's going to be a bit hard for somebody in that particular area. But the sooner you flush that stuff out, the better, because actually you're going to have to deal with it one way, and it's much better to deal with it up front than deal with it as a problem later.
Yeah, no, agree. And I did see Pauline Maynard laughing then when you mentioned happy path, a veteran of many an unhappy path in a process there. But I think that's a really, really good point in that if you don't know the full picture, the end to end, bringing everything together, the great ways of working, the what if we do if it goes wrong, what are you actually going to do if it goes wrong? How are you going to unpick that? How are you going to find your root cause and stop it happening in the future? So that's one of the benefits there. And I think you also, by that, you get to know what information is needed by people for when your processes, by when in your processes that they need to happen and be efficient. So I think it's great. You've got your new shiny system, and it's going to let you invoice clients within 5 working days at the end of the month. But you didn't think about the fact that your people actually have to put the timesheets in, and you forgot to tell them that they're going to do it on a weekly basis rather than a monthly basis. So you miss that end-to-end join up data flow as well. I think, again, that kind of calls into knowing how your teams are going to interact with each other. And I think for me, and I'm happy to take criticism or comments on this one, you actually, by not taking the time up front, you don't really think about how your ERP is going to optimize your processes and how it's going to help you improve. So if you go like for like and you take your as is in your current system and you stick it in your wonderful new system, if you've got somebody who's signing something off on a piece of paper and it has to go around 5 different people's desks before it gets entered in the system, if you don't know that, how are you going to know that you could put it in the system and the system would send it to someone automatically and then they could just approve it? So it gives you that opportunity to say, well, we do it this way. Do we really need to do it that way in the future? So those are the things around business processes. And I think they kind of, lead us into our next point, which Dave, you touched on as well, around organizational design and roles within an ERP program, a lot of the time we just consider the technical roles, that so and so needs, I don't know, let's talk SAP language, old SAP language, VFO1 in their role to complete this transaction in there, but we don't think about the organizational design structure and what that means. And Dave, you said there, you know, where you've got 10 people doing a job now, you might not need that. So a lot of programs, and sorry, I am just looking at my notes here. A lot of programs do tend to fail to take that into account. And I think we've spoken about numbers, but also that responsibility, accountability, and skills may change because of your new system. So by looking at your processes and then looking at your organizational design, you can identify necessary skills, qualifications, skill gaps, and then also the system and security role designed to mitigate your business process risks. And then you can take that and conduct a more detailed analysis of any other organizational design impacts you need to consider. Dave, have you seen this particularly handled well in a project, or not handled so well? And I do feel like I am interviewing again, so you've got the job already. Please feel free to jump in.
So you interview away. Yeah, probably not so well.
Okay.
Yeah, probably not so well most of the time. There's some better examples, but I think some of the things, picking up on some of the things you said. So if you think of a multi-site or a multi-market sort of implementation of ERP, that whole sort of organizational thing around amount of people sometimes isn't thought out appropriately. So you can construct the requirement for, I don't know, 5 people to be involved in a process, and you get to market Z that's got 3 people, you know, in the whole organization. So you've got conflicts of interest, you've got SOD to think about. They're all, none of them beyond the wit of man, you know, they're all able to be mitigated. But if you don't do the work up front, you arrive at the problem in those places because you've designed something that's not fit for purpose in a smaller organization, which is what you have an example of in your group, potentially. I think another one is when you're considering the organizational design, there's a couple of things that I think are quite important. One is it's important to work out, so map the processes and work out what the important thing, you talked about optimization, I think, work out what those important things are that you're trying to optimize. I've got a well-hackneyed saying that I've used a lot in different projects, which is something like, if that's so important, who's got that job? So I don't know, you know, I can remember being involved in an organization, customer promise date was awful, right? And we were losing business because our ability to create and convey accurate customer promise dates was appalling. And we were doing loads of work around it, around process improvement. And it was the first time it occurred to me, and I've used it loads of times since, because it just struck me once I'd thought about it, which was that, but no one's got that job. No one is actually responsible for customer promise date. It belongs to many people and no one, you know. And actually, if you take that mindset, it works quite often, you know, to say, if that's so important, who's actually doing that? So try and think of that and build that into the OD. And I think the other thing I'd say about organizational design is that I've seen done well and not so well, but it's a watch point, I think, is design the organization, and it's back to your optimization point, really. Design the organization for what you want it to be, for what you want it to do. Quite often, that seems obvious, but it's overlooked quite often, because quite often what people do is look at what they've got and who they've got and rearrange on that basis, if you like. And actually, what you should do is design what you want, then map people to those roles, see if they fit innately. If they don't, see what upskilling and retraining you can do to get people to fit. And after that, you've got some gaps and some, you know, some difficult conversations. But that's the right way to go about it. Otherwise, all you've done is recrafted what you've got to make it fit what you've got, and what you've got may well not be what you need.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And I have to say, I saw Mr. Lidder laughing when you said taking, a global template to a smaller market, because I think I was on that project with him as well.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So on that, just to wrap up on org design before I move on to my next one, I think we've said, you make sure you've got the right people in the right roles, and it's not just for them, it's for the organization as well. Maybe that should have been the other way around, not just for the organization, but to allow your people to develop as well, where they want to get to. And it's quite funny, I've seen in the past where, you've had a qualified accountant, and they've been managing key accounts in their old system, and all of a sudden in their new system, their entire job is posting journals. Probably not what you want them to be doing, right? They've got this qualification. Let's look at how that's structured. And you said right number of people in right roles. Hopefully your new ERP is going to reduce the time that you need to process things. So where you had 10 people running a credit department, they don't have to log into 20 different systems and the spreadsheet now. They only have to log on to your new ERP. So maybe those you only actually need 10 people, and the 10 could go into different roles. And I think a really good point, and we were talking about this with a colleague the other day, one of the things that we don't consider is that your new ERP might bring new roles into your organization that you don't have now. You might need new support teams. Have you got them? Have you got people to upskill? Or also, do you need to start thinking about going straight to market right now and looking for them? Because there's nothing worse than having a brand new spanking system and no one to help you fix it if anything fails. So that was my piece on org design. And Dave, if there's anything else, jump in. If not, I'll move on to my next consideration on my list, which was about process governance. So we've got our system, we've got our processes. They've been used for change and they've been used for learning. And that's all wonderful. But from experience, and yes, from personal experience, even when an ERP program launches successfully, there's still an opportunity for things to go a bit pear-shaped. So one key area is process governance. So you've got your pretty processes, they've happened for change, you've got your learning activities, your people are in the new system, and everything is tickety-boo. All systems go. But now we're done, we can just leave those systems and those processes to languish in whatever documentation repository you've put them in. But you didn't actually consider your process ownership, management, and governance in your program design. So I think one of the key things for me is process ownership, having the right people as process owners up front, all the way through the program, and getting people moving there, and making sure those right people are there and in that role. And metrics, having the right metrics in place, making sure you know what you want to report on, you know what you want to see and how you're going to improve in that area. And then I think also kind of like a governance structure in place for future improvement opportunities, something that's not seen very often. How are you going to work end to end, not in your siloed way, not in your red walled way, but all the way through the organization? This ERP should bring you together working end to end in your organization. So making sure that that carries on. Dave, any last thoughts on this before we hand over to Dan?
Yeah, I think a couple of points. I think the first one is around sort of organizational governance type. So, you can have a sort of center out approach, or you can have a distributed approach in terms of ownership and governance. We won't have time enough. It's a session all on its own right, this one, but my personal view is that there should be some version of hub and spoke. So hub being the center and someone owning it, spoke being, I don't know, key users, super users out in the plants, the markets, whatever, feeding back in the process improvements and whatever, but someone centrally making decisions for the greater good. That's a personal view. So we could discuss that a lot more. But I think the key thing is that someone's on point.
Yeah.
Someone has, to my point earlier, someone has the job of owning that process, hopefully an end-to-end process, hopefully globally, but that someone owns it. Where I've seen that done best was a German automotive company, where a guy who I knew quite well had a dual role, and they were both recognised roles. He was a plant director, but he was also the order to cash process owner globally for that company. Now, look, he didn't do the day-to-day stuff, but everything went across his desk, and the governance ultimately was his call. So, you know, if something was being done differently in Brazil to Munich, at some point he'd signed that off, and you know, there was a piece of governance. And I think you need that sort of level. You can be too overbearing with it, but I think you need that sort of level of oversight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Dave, you made a really good point there. We could probably do a whole new webinar on this, but I'm getting the looks that says I've spoken for too long. So in wrap up, 3 things: business process design, please, 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 business, 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 numbers, to quote Unikitty. We also need to think about your organizational design structure and having that right upfront process governance model would help you greatly, not go Pete Tong. Thank you all for listening to me. I will now hand over to my very esteemed colleague, Mr. Taylor, to talk about skills, capabilities, and how learning could possibly go a bit Pete Tong.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate that. So yes, I'm here to talk to you this afternoon about skills and capabilities, specifically learning on ERP programs. And as already has been said throughout this session, implementing ERP successfully requires lots of careful planning and attention outside of the technology itself. You can build the most sophisticated, robust solution, but if the people that actually need to carry out the transactions and the day-to-day roles aren't comfortable using the system, the project is always going to be classified as having gone Pete Tong, to use the phrase from the title. This risk can be mitigated by ensuring that there's the 3 key aspects of learning has been considered, planned for, and actioned. The first element of that is that through a lack of integration with pre-existing L&D teams. Most organisations have existing L&D departments, but they're usually bypassed, as the project, as Guy mentioned in his opening, it is usually seen as an IT initiative. And that is until, unfortunately, the end of the project, when the focus changes from the solution itself to be on the people that are actually needing to transact. And all of a sudden, fires, everyone's running around. So the main risk of not integrating with the L&D department is you ultimately end up with inadequate user training, which can lead to suboptimal system utilization. People don't know how to carry out their activities properly. They're finding workarounds which impact the processes that Alex has just taken us through. And it can also lead to things like data security issues, because people aren't transacting, they're not keying in exactly what they need to, which obviously has a negative impact on the business's data integrity and the overall security of the organization and their clients potentially. So engagement with the L&D department at the earliest opportunity will help you mitigate this risk, and it will also give you the ability to identify the correct delivery methods that are right for the specific client, for the people in their roles as well. It's not a cookie cutter solution. It's, you know, e-learning is not always the best solution. Face-to-face isn't always the best solution. You do need to really get into to understand the organisation to be able to identify what works best for those individuals. And Dave, I believe you've got some insights on this area specifically.
Yeah, again, probably a whole session could be had on it, right? But
of course,
I think one of the big things for me is that what's often overlooked is that these programs themselves are an L&D opportunity, because it's a journey many people have never been on and may never go on again, and there are so many learnings and opportunities in it. And it starts with, quite often leadership will say, "Oh, we haven't got the right people. We haven't got people to put onto that program. I can't afford to put people on that program. I certainly can't put so and so or so and so on." And actually, the reverse is true, right? They should be putting the best people on, probably full time, but they should be putting the best people on, because what they're asking them to do is assess their organisation and optimize it for the future. This is the way the company is going to run in the future. Who else would you actually entrust that to other than your best people who know their subject matter? But that doesn't always happen by any means. So there's something in there. I think there's also something around forgetting that it's not just the program, if you like. People's soft skills need developing. So often we throw people into programs and they haven't had the learning and development up till there quite often. So, you know, their ability to get into what I call the soft skills, the essential stuff, it's not been developed that well. And you made a point about the type of training. So at that high level, I think that's an important point, because especially with millennials and the Generation Z now, there's a lot of research that says that despite the fact we've been through COVID and we're all getting used to hybrid and variations of hybrid and, you know, working from distance and all that good stuff, actually it says that a lot of people would much prefer sort of classroom-based face-to-face training, and would feel that that would really benefit them, because actually it's something they've missed out on in their daily job quite often.
Which is a really interesting point, actually, Dave, that you raised there. And that's one thing that we've noticed at Systock, is before the pandemic, there was a lot more requirements for e-learning. That was the new shiny thing that everybody wanted to adopt, and this is what we're going to do. And actually, throughout the pandemic, without that ability to have that sort of personable face-to-face interaction, what we've found coming out of the pandemic and lockdowns is that a lot more of our clients and people that we work with actually do want that face-to-face. They now see the benefit in it as it was taken away. And I think, you know, again, this is a whole subject I can talk to for hours, but it's about finding that blended approach that works for the organisation and the individuals in their roles. There's not always one solution. Quite often there's a few different types which would work best. Thank you, Dave. Yeah, so the second main cause of failure of learning on SAP programs is lack of vision. So much emphasis is placed on the solution, the official go live date. You know, everyone's got that put in their calendar with a big red ring around it from day one of joining it. All the focus is on that one date. But very rarely is there any consideration for how materials are going to be maintained and sustained, with that eye on continuous improvement post go live. It's all about getting it done for go live, getting people able to transact, and then it stops. But of course, we know that that's not how things work. People need to develop, people need to continue working. The organisation is going to continue to change after that date. And without having that eye on continuous improvement and a plan in place to be able to maintain and sustain materials that are created, what ends up happening is clients create a real dependency on consultancies to be the white knight that comes in, rides in and saves the day, which is, you know, amazing for consultancies, of course, but actually it leaves the clients without the capabilities and the planning to be able to manage that on their own and to become self-sufficient, which is a thing that we notice. And I think for Systock, it's something we're quite proud of. It's that we see a lot of value in helping our clients become self-sustainable and helping them overcome those challenges. As we all know, implementing SAP is the first step. You have the project, you have the implementation itself, but with the end of support for things like ECC ever looming, chances are that once you've finished your program, you're already planning for the next. You're already creating projects for enhancements, for upgrades to that solution, and a clear vision aligned with those future upgrades for learning post go live will ensure that you're ready to manage those upgrades. You're ready to give your staff, your employees, the skills and capabilities that they need in order to continue to run with that and to deal with those upgrades as and when they come. And obviously there is some external capability required there, but if you've grown your capability internally, you can deal with a lot of those changes yourself with the support from external providers as well. At Systock, one of the things that we've found talking around this is that establishing support structures with clear channels for users to seek help and support after they go live have really aided that challenge. So that could include things like help desks, you've got online resources. One of the things that we've found to be really incredibly useful and simple as well, it's really simple, is the increased use of Microsoft Teams channels. So what we've done with a few of our clients is to create channels and encourage users to communicate using these channels after their training events, which reduces the demands that are placed on, you know, your typical project resources, so your SMEs, your trainers, and actually becomes a more collaborative social experience for the learners, which is something that we all know. I'm sure we're all familiar with. It's the drain on our resources. People are always saying, we don't have time to do this. How can I maintain this? Put the ownership back onto the learners. Give them the ownership and the empowerment to actually drive that level of adoption within their own groups. And I say that's something we've learned from the pandemic. It's been really incredibly useful for us. Dave, do you have any thoughts on that specifically?
I think that the topic's probably a strategic one, and there's a real need to have a clear strategic approach to it, in the sense that I don't think there's anything wrong at all with buying in resources, external consultants to create your materials, to deliver your training, etc., etc. But actually, if you can't answer the question, who's responsible for that, who's going to make sure we're sustaining our training in our organisation, then you haven't done the right thing. Because all those people, all of us people who are involved in programs as external folk, we go at some point, right? And if you can't answer the question, who's the permanent person, or who's the person in the organisation who's going to be able to be responsible for making sure that we're in the right place there, then that's a first problem. I think the other thing is, it's about deciding how you want to organise around that strategically. So I've seen people who are key users, not even super users, right? So the distinction may be lost for people, but people who are working on tools on a job, who are identified as someone who gets their job and is a go-to person, right? So often called a key user or a super user or some such thing, but then who are accountable for training new people. Training, not making them welcome, not pointing to them where the how-tos are and all that good stuff, but actually training them. They're not trainers. Why would you do that unless you give them some training in being trainers, in which case that's fine. But that comes back to my point. It's all about strategy. Decide what you want and execute against it. Because far too often in the same company, you see all the variations of that potential strategy and not a common stream. And I think that's a common mistake, and usually ends up with you having a mixed bag of, for those that have done it well, they've done it well. For those that have done it badly, there may even be nothing, or it's something that's 10 years old that really isn't fit for purpose.
Is that question again, who's responsible, isn't it? Process training throughout the program, who is responsible? It's a recurring question we keep asking ourselves. So at this point, you've engaged with L&D, you've planned your training methods, your deliveries, you've got that eye on continuous improvement. The next step is to ensure that the employees have access to the high quality materials that have been created. Now that could be e-learning, PowerPoint, simulations, process maps, videos, you name it. The list is endless of different delivery types that you can use. But it's something, again, that's so often overlooked, is how are my employees going to find these materials? Whenever I've asked a question on programs, I'm sure this would be familiar to most on the call. Someone will say, don't worry, it's a centralized location, it's on SharePoint. For anybody that's used SharePoint, we know that that has its own sets of issues. Its structure isn't the greatest. You've got access requests. The admin of that side of things is time consuming. You almost have to have a resource just specifically for that role. And if you think about when a user might need these materials, it's always going to be at the point of need. It's going to be when they're transacting in the system. They're trying to raise a sales order, they're trying to raise an invoice. And as an example, if you think of an organization that their employees are talking to customers on the phone, how realistic is it that employee is able to open SharePoint, find the user guide for VAO1, create a sales order, then transact whilst they're talking to a customer? There's just too much to it. There's too many pitfalls. There's too many things that go wrong. So they just sit there. They become dormant. Nobody uses them. People find ways around it. And again, something that we've come across is also you may find a location to store it in, but it's the structure that you have to that as well. It's all well and good having everything under sales and distribution on a SharePoint for people that are working on a project that understand what sales and distribution is. But if I'm a person working in the warehouse or a salesperson, that's not going to make sense to me. I'm not going to recognize that terminology. So the material should be structured in a way that I can find what I need for my role easily. It's easy to navigate. I can find it and I can open it and I can use it, and then I can put it away again until I need it next time. Because like I say, it's always point of need learning is the key piece to that, to ensure that people can use the system properly. David, have you got anything to share? I know we're running out of time, so have you got anything else to add to that?
Yeah, just real briefly, I think just reinforce what you've said. I think the important thing is that you've got that there's some standards set for what materials we want. Doesn't have to be gold standard, but it has to be adequate and appropriate and consistent, and that's sort of shared across the disciplines, so that there's an expectation again created of what should be there, and then making it accessible for me as an individual, in job role almost, or ideally so that when I go in, my credentials take me to what I need to see, be it the transactional system stuff or be it the contextual stuff of the end-to-end process. But easy navigation, yeah, that's the key.
Yeah. Yeah, and so all of these points, and ultimately, if they're not completed or the risks aren't mitigated properly, they end up with employees who are going to struggle to use that new system that you've spent millions of pounds on implementing. It's taken 2 years to get to this point, and then you have people that can't use it, and ultimately that ends in frustrated employees. The morale is decreased, the job satisfaction is decreased, and the overall workplace productivity is also impacted by that. So I think training is very much easy to leave to the end, and we can cut it out as the fact, but really the impact that it has on the people is not going to set up the project or the organisation for success post go live. And I think
thank you,
Guy.
Thank you, Dan. Well, we predicted that this would be there'd be a lot to cover, and we've certainly that's been proven right. So thank you everyone for your contributions. We do have 5 minutes for a few questions. I am going to go through them in some kind of chronological order in which they were asked, and this is the moment that nobody else is looking forward to, because I have the power to tell people who's going to answer which question. So Dave, Alex, Dan, be afraid. The first question is from Fiona, is possibly for a future webinar, what size, number of transactions, number of people, size from a revenue perspective should a business be considering to implement an ERP system? I think you're right, it's probably a whole separate webinar, but certainly, Fiona, from our experience, we are very much an SME in Systock, and we've just implemented our own mini ERP system. I think the point is, as an organization, it's when you realize that your technology, your processes, your systems are held together with sellotape, plaster string, Excel, Visual Basic, if that's still a thing. Haven't been on a course for a while. It's at that point you realize it's all a house of cards that could all fall apart, is when you probably need to think about an ERP. And you could be an SME. I've seen some very large organizations who are also held together by sellotape and plasters. But yeah, good point for another webinar. Looking forward to that one. A great comment from Paul: establishing process governance can aid, shine a spotlight of lacking leadership buy-in. Absolutely. I think it's a good way of bringing that to the light. I think, Dave, sorry, but the next one is definitely for you. How do you know that the executives have the same understanding of an organization? How do you know you're addressing the right challenges, staff and leadership? I'm going to restrict you to 30 seconds, Dave.
Yeah.
Give it a shot.
Yeah. How do you know? I think the quick answer is only by being clear with yourself up front what you're measuring, if you like, which is what meant to be a cop out. But it can't just be based on personality or words that are said in meetings, right? It has to be seen in actions. That's the key to it. And I think it also relies on the senior folk in the program being engaged with the senior folk, so that you get that context of what their engagement really is, rather than just the sound bites. As a real quick answer, I'd rather give it a fast answer, but you asked me to be quick.
We can give a longer answer via a different medium. I'm going to break with protocol and go to Harry, who's got his hand up.
Hi guys, thanks. This might also be one that has to be done on a different medium for a longer answer, but point picked up there at the end that making sure that a user in different roles can access the documentation quickly and easily, I think is very, very valid. We're heavily dependent here on SharePoint. Until our new ERP system comes in, it is underpinning everything we do. And I was wondering if you had any best practices with SharePoint to help in the medium term, before the new ERP and new document standards come in.
I'm going to throw that one to Alex. She knew it was coming. No way.
Did I? Harry, absolutely. Let's have a chat. So obviously we do a lot of actual work with SharePoint. So we've certainly got some hints and tips we can throw your way. I can see some people on the call who've seen some of our knowledge portals on that one. So absolutely. I think it's not a 30-second chat. Guy didn't give me that, but we can probably come back to you with some more information post the call if that's all right.
Yeah, sounds really good. I thought it'd be a longer answer than the quick one at the end there. But yeah,
Separate webinar.
Like
Thank you.
Or
Thanks for
a
your
webinar. Good point.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Harry. Next question. Thank you, Alex, as well. Next question from Dave Evans. Putting your best people on a program is obviously the right thing to do. How do you overcome the fact that essentially those individuals make themselves superfluous to the organization? I think that's a really good question. I'm going to answer that one, if that's all right, Dave. I've been on a program where a number of very, not senior, but valuable people were placed onto the program. And the way they got around this was identifying the roles that they would fill post-program. So they, as part of the gift, if you like, or the reward for being on a program and seeing it through, and surprise, surprise, there were delays to that ERP program. Doesn't happen often. They were promised choice roles, and so getting through the challenging period, they were promised choice roles that the organization knew would still be there post program. And I think that's a key point. And I think Alex talked about how roles were changing, but again, it could be a much longer discussion and conversation. I think we've got time for one more, so I'm going to this is a good one. Dan, 30 seconds on how do you find the right balance between in-person and remote learning?
30 seconds. Okay. I guess there's lots of different factors. Obviously, budget, cost, geographical location being the three obvious that jump out at me. I think what we try to do at SysDoc is to try to have a blended approach. So we will do anything complex. Any complex processes would typically be done face to face in a room. You know, you can get process maps on the wall. You can get really interactive with that level of training. And then anything that's maybe a little bit less complex, less of an impact, we would try to do remote learning. But we would always try to do a bit of face-to-face, a bit of remote, and a bit of e-learning. So it's a fully blended solution across that.
That's exactly 30 seconds, I think, Dan. Well done.
There you go.
I wasn't timing it, but it's pretty close. The time has come. It is 2 o'clock, and in great ERP program etiquette, programs never overrun, meetings never overrun, and we're going to try and be the same. Thank you all for joining. We will reach out to everybody who's been on the webinar with a summary of the questions that we've answered, and there are a couple that we weren't able to, so we'll make sure we do that. If you do have any questions, any suggestions on future webinars, we've already got at least 3, I think, please do reach out to us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar in the next few months. So thank you all. Thanks to the